everyone, and once again, welcome to the course Introduction to Anthropology. So today we're going to have our first lecture, and we will start with general concerns about anthropology, the discipline, and we will try to, in this first lecture, we will try to define the word anthropology, and I'm going to give you some key concepts that we use in anthropology. Then later on this week, we will talk about the 4 subfields of anthropology. First, let's try to understand what anthropology is. Now you might know that, but anthropology actually comes from a Greek word, ancient Greek word. Well, it could be divided into 2 words, since in the word anthropology there is anthropos, that means man or people, and there is the word logos, that means the study of. And logos, as you know, is also used in other disciplines such as biology or psychology, for instance. So if you are not sure about the definition of the word, you just have to go back to the etymology of the word anthropology, to the origin, to the roots of the word, because here you're gonna have the definition. So anthropology basically means the science of humans. All right. So because it deals with humans, of course, it's a very broad discipline. It's not only about humans of the 21st century, and it's not only about humans of the Middle East, for example, but it talks about humans at large, from the origins of humanity until now, and across the globe. So not only of one continent, but humans everywhere across the globe. So the broad definition that we can give of anthropology would be this one here. Anthropology is the broad study of humankind around the world and throughout time. So please keep in mind that it's not only about one specific continent or one specific era, but it deals with humans at large. Now, this is why, because we talk about humans, this is also why anthropology is concerned with both biological and cultural aspects. All right? So anthropology at large, at least in its American definition of the word, anthropology deals with humans, any aspects that are related to humans, and it's throughout time and throughout around the world. So here, again, because it's about humans, it means that under the umbrella of what we call anthropology, the study of humans, we're gonna have different branches. So here the discipline, again in the US, has been divided into 4 different main fields. Okay, so the discipline anthropology is divided into 4 subfields. This is what we're going to discuss in the next lecture this week. But just so you know now that anthropology also covers here archaeology, okay, so the study of humans in the past, cultural anthropology, this is what we're going to talk about here in this course, biological anthropology, so this has to do with human origins, and also with forensic anthropology, the anatomy, paleoanthropology, and so on. And then linguistic anthropology. We're going to have a chapter that is related to this one, while we will talk about language and culture. Okay, so under the umbrella of anthropology, there are 4 subfields, 4 branches: archaeology, cultural anthropology, biological anthropology, and finally linguistic anthropology. You might know that as well, but here anthropology adopts what we call a holistic approach. So it means that anthropology deals with the four subfields that we just mentioned, and anthropology will talk about different perspectives on human. So holistic is a word that comes from whole. So holistic basically means everything, okay? Whole. So every aspects that are related to humans here, this is what we say that anthropology is a holistic discipline and adopts a holistic approach. So the holistic perspective here is one of the fundamental principles of anthropology. It means that the discipline will cover and talk about culture as well as about the anatomy, for example. And it means that under what we called culture, we're gonna analyze many different aspects also. The social context, the political one, the economic one, the religious practices, and all aspects are somehow related to one another. Alright, so anthropology adopts a holistic approach. It means that it studies everything that is related to human. It's a whole perspective on humans. Let's continue to explain why anthropology adopts a holistic approach. Here, as you can see, anthropology, we just mentioned that, involves both biological and sociocultural aspects of humanity. Alright? So it means that this is the first reason we say that anthropology is using a holistic approach. It's because it's not only about the cultural aspect, but it's also about the biological one. It's also about the history of humans. So it's also about related to archaeology, and it's also about the way people talk. So it's also related to linguistic anthropology. All right. So anthropology involves different aspects. Okay. Now we say also that anthropology is a holistic approach. Uses a holistic approach because, and we're gonna have a chapter about that, the way anthropologists conduct research is also somehow holistic. Anthropologists, they go into a field, okay, they do a field work, what we call, and they're gonna study small sample of the population. Of course, they cannot study, for example, if they are doing a fieldwork in the United Arab Emirates, they cannot study the entire country. It's too big, the population is 10 million, so anthropologists cannot deal with that amount of people. So they're gonna study smaller sample of population, and then from that field, from that experience, they will try to build human universal. So they will study a small sample, but then they will try to explain human features, okay, what is common between humans or what is common between some specific people of a place. They will try to build human universal, all right? So this is another reason why we call it a holistic approach. Anthropologists study smaller populations to look for human universal and to study the range of variation in humans. So what is common and what is different between humans. Now here, to illustrate what I just said, I just wanted to give you a definition, quotation, sorry. Here, let me read it for you. So holistic approach, whereas the sociologist or the political scientist might examine the beauty of a flower petal by petal, the anthropologist is the person that stands on the top of the mountain and looks at the beauty of the field. In other words, we try and go for the wider perspective. So this is also the reason why anthropologists, they have to use a holistic approach, because they are studying humans. So they cannot avoid some aspects, okay? They have to look at the wider perspective. Now, once again, to illustrate this, I want to give you a specific example. I want us to use a case study that happened in the South Pacific. And throughout this case study, I hope that you will be able to better grasp what I mean by holistic approach. So here, there is a reading activity that is connected to this one. You have the article available on the Google Classroom. I actually posted 2 articles. One is more scientific, written by the anthropologist that conducted this research, and the other one is somehow summary of the scientific, the academic paper. So what you have to do, I want you here please to read these 2 articles. If you have done it, you should pause this video, and I would like you please to go through the material and to have a look at the article. The article written by Lindeberg is about 10 pages, and if you want, you have a summary posted also in Google Classroom. Okay, where are we? We are in the South Pacific. As you can see here on the map, this is Australia, and here this is the Indonesian part of Papua. So Papua here, this island, is divided into 2 territories. There is the Indonesian part, and there is an autonomous country called Papua New Guinea. All right, it used to be under the Australian government, under the control of the Australian government, and it became independent in 1975. The capital of Papua New Guinea, PNG, is Port Moresby, all right, located here on the map. Now we're going to talk about a very small tribe that lives here in the mountain, and we're going to talk about the people called Fore, F-O-R-E, Fore people, okay? Those people, as you can see here, they live in a very remote area in the middle of the mountains, and you should know now that you have read the article, they became somehow famous, sadly famous, in the scientific community because they got a disease that was difficult to understand and difficult to cure, if not impossible. So first, let me give you a brief ethnographic overview of the Fore people. So the Fore people, they are what we call horticulturalists. So it means that they eat what they produce, they are self-sufficient. Like I said, they live in a remote area of Papua New Guinea. And during the 50s, it happens that a lot of them died. Why did they die? It was apparently an incurable neurodegenerative disorder. So many suffered from an unknown disease that they called kuru. What does kuru mean in Fore language? It means shaking. So they call it the shaking disease, the kuru disease, because that was one of the symptoms that people had, right? They were shaking, they were trembling, and at some point their muscles became very small and they were not able to walk or to do anything, and then quite rapidly their brain stopped functioning. Now this disease affected more women and more children than men. So here they couldn't guess where was it coming from. The medical doctors that were there, they checked everything. They checked the DNA of the people. They checked their muscles, their body. They looked into the different symptoms, but they couldn't tell where was this disease coming from. The only thing that they knew was that it was caused by prion. So prion is a bacteria. Well, they discovered that afterwards. And because they couldn't say where was it coming from, they decided to call anthropologists to help them. So they brought a team of anthropologists, a couple, Lindenberg, and they asked them to observe the furry people in order to understand where was this disease coming from. So here, this couple observed the different cultural practices, and they discovered that the furry people were actually what we called cannibal. The furry people were practicing cannibalism, and more specifically, they were doing what we called endocannibalism. So, cannibalism, I'm sure you know that, is the act of eating the flesh of its own species. So it's one species that eats the flesh of another member of the same species, okay? And that's what the furry people were doing. Now, they were not eating the flesh of any strangers, and they were not doing this without any specific reasons. Of course, it was related to the culture. So here they were practicing what we call endocannibalism. Endo, it means from the inside. So they were eating the people of their own community, of their own tribe, and they were doing this because of a specific belief, because they thought that by eating the flesh, by eating the body of that dead person, would help the soul to be released. So it would help the soul of the person to go in different dimension and to be set free. So the idea behind was to set free the person that was just dead. So it was completely integrated, completely part of a funeral ceremony. And mostly women and children were eating the brain, okay? The men ate different parts of the body, but it was mostly the women and the children that ate the brains. So that's why they were more affected by the disease than the men. So here, furry people contracted prions by eating their relatives' remains, especially brain, at funeral ceremonies. Okay, because again it was part of a ritual. And the medical team hasn't been able to unlock this case, but anthropologists did. So this is why we call it a holistic approach, because it is the combination of both cultural and biological aspects that help to understand this case. Okay, so endocannibalism, here is the practice of eating the flesh of human being member of the same community. It is opposed to exocannibalism. Exocannibalism is a cultural practices where human eats the flesh of human, or it could be also animals, any other species, eat the flesh of other members, so people who are not part of their community. This was pretty common in Melanesia, in the same area that we're discussing, in countries such as Vanuatu, for example, and people were eating the flesh of their enemies in order to get their mana, what we call mana. Mana is the power. So in order to get the power of the enemies, it was a common cultural practices in some places to eat the remain bodies of the dead enemies. So to stop that, there were different campaigns. This is one of them here. So the local authorities, they tried to stop this. Of course, it was promoted by the doctors that realized that it was coming from this funeral cultural practice. So they tried to stop cannibalism. And that's the kind of poster that they spread at that time. So, Duyukuru, smart cannibals don't eat brains, to try to make the population stop that. So, if we summarize the case, there are different ways to view culture. So here, anthropology managed to unlock the answer of Kuru. It wasn't the medical knowledge, but it was because anthropologists went there, observed people, that they were able to unlock the case. Here, it means that anthropologists adopted a holistic approach again. Why a holistic approach? Because here they were both observers, okay, from the outside, but also somehow insiders, because they had to live among the people in order to get what they were doing and why what they're doing caused a disease, right? So holism here involves viewing something from the inside, okay, from the insider perspective, it's what we call emic, and from the outsider perspective. So both views provide what we call a holistic picture. Let me continue talking a little bit more about that, just for you to understand clearly. So there are two ways of viewing culture. There is the emic analysis and there is the ethic analysis. So here, emic analysis is the insider's perspective and ethic analysis is the outsider's perspective. Now, a way to remember this would be to look at ethic. Ethic, there is a T, like in outside. Okay, so ethic, outsider's perspective, emic, insider's perspective. So ethic is the study of a society using concepts that were developed outside the culture. So using concepts, but also literature, articles, and disciplines that were developed outside the culture. Whether for the emic analysis, it went there, sorry about that. It's viewing the culture through the eyes of the people that you're studying. So it will imply to live among the people, to do what they're doing. We call it participant observation. And by doing so, you will be able to gain an understanding of the culture itself. Right? So you will try to understand the world through the eyes of the people that you're studying. And that's one of the main things that anthropologists are doing. So if I summarize, why do we talk about anthropology as a holistic discipline using a holistic approach? Is because first, anthropology deals with culture, but also with biological aspects, right? So it's, it encompasses many different perspectives on human. Then we say that it's a holistic approach because anthropology will study small sample of the population, but then they will try to broad universal using this. And then we say that anthropology uses a holistic approach because of this, because it tries to understand the culture from an insider's perspective, but also to take some distance and to step out from the field, from the people that anthropologists are studying, and to try to apply some specific concepts that were developed outside the culture itself. So this is another reason. All right? So keep in mind that anthropology, it's a holistic discipline. So as a whole, it studies many different aspects of human, and it tries to adopt a wider perspective on human. Now let's continue and finish with two last concepts that I want us to discuss. Here, I want us to talk about a very useful and very important concept of anthropology that is here described in this picture. Hopefully you can see it well. In this picture you have a white lady naked, some would say naked, wearing a bikini, going to the beach or wherever, and she thinks in her mind, everything covered but her eyes. What a cruel male-dominated culture. And you have a lady on the other side, Muslim, we can say from the outfit, wearing a niqab that says, nothing covered but her eyes. What a cruel male-dominated culture. Now I like this cartoon because it shows that we all tend to judge. We all tend to judge people based on what? Based on our own culture, based on our own assumption. And this is the concept I want you to remember. This concept is called ethnocentrism. It's using one's own culture as the basis for interpreting and judging other cultures. Okay, so ethnocentrism is when once we judge a culture based on its own culture. There are different levels, different degree of ethnocentrism. There is what we call moderate ethnocentrism. So it's looking at another culture to the lens of your own culture. Okay, this is particularly normal, if I can say it this way. It's part of human psychology. We all tend to do that. But the main thing, what we're trying to do here in anthropology, is to be aware of it. Because if you are aware of it, you can then prevent any strong judgment, and you know that ethnocentrism can lead to racism or can lead to any types of discrimination. All right. However, there is another level of ethnocentrism, is what we call extreme ethnocentrism, and it could be what I just said about racism. It could be considering another culture as inferior because it is different than your own culture. And this extreme ethnocentrism could be definitely dangerous. I would like you to try to think of examples of ethnocentrism. I will create a chat for you to send me your answers, but try to think of examples that you might have witnessed or you might have experienced yourself. An example, a situation of ethnocentrism. I'm going to give you one here related to language practice and word we use. So here, an example, actually I'm going to give you only one example of the ethnocentrism in the language. For example, the way we call others. The way we call others is often related to the way we perceive others based on our own culture. If you take the people that live in Canada or in Alaska, okay, above the Arctic Circle, those people were called for decades Eskimo. Eskimo, it actually means eaters of raw flesh. Now, Eskimo is a word used by outsiders. When the people arrived there, they named them Eskimo because that's probably a word that they heard and they thought that was the name of those people. So they were called Eskimo. However, Inuit is the word used by members of this group, okay, used by the insiders, and they want to be called Inuit. And by the way, we should all avoid using the term Eskimo because it's ethnocentric. And Inuit, it actually translates to real people, and is the word that should be used to describe the people living, the native people living above the Arctic Circle in Canada and Alaska. So this is an example. So it could be minor example, but we should be aware and we should be careful of words we're using. Question: how to avoid ethnocentrism? How can we stop being ethnocentric? What can we do? Now I'm asking this question. You might have tons of answers to that. Here we could discuss it for a long time. I'm just going to give you a concept that is actually the opposite of ethnocentrism. This concept is called cultural relativism. If you look at this map, for example, the map that most of us used to is the map view from the North Hemisphere, positioning Europe on the right side and the American continent on the left side, with Africa and somehow down, and Australia on the side. So this very well spread map is usually considered to be the norm, the normal way to represent the world. However, if you travel to the South Pacific here, you would see different perspective, and it's maybe your case, but if you also live in the South Hemisphere, you would and you can perceive this northern view as very limited view, and somehow as an ethnocentric view of the world. So cultural relativism tries to do the opposite. Here it says that we can change our perspective, we can tolerate other perspective. So basically, cultural relativism is an attempt to analyze and understand cultures other than one's own culture without judging them in terms of one's own culture. All right? So there is one anthropologist that first tried to promote that at the beginning of the 20th century. His name is Franz Boas. We will talk more about him. And he actually developed a stream called cultural relativism, and he greatly influenced the discipline. So of course we can all tolerate different perspectives. Now we should be conscious that when I say tolerate other cultural perspective, it shouldn't interfere with international human rights and with moral. Because if we take as an example rape or murder, now can we tolerate moral crimes in the name of tolerance? Maybe not. So cultural relativism has its limit as well. This is the end of the first lecture. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it wasn't too long. I hope everything is clear. Just a quick summary. So in this course, in this lecture, you've learned what is anthropology. So you should be able to define anthropology. And we've talked about different concepts that we're going to use throughout these 6 weeks. And those concepts should be also known. So you should know the 4 subfields, but we will discuss them in the next lecture. You should know what holistic approach is, so what holism is. You should know what is the emic and ethic perspective. You should know what cannibalism is. You should know ethnocentrism. And finally, you should know cultural relativism. Thank you for today, and see you later this week.